Well, this week we are spending some time looking at the reality of addiction and drug taking. And in this second part with Paul Hammond, Penny Williams, who's the CEO of Kenwood Trust, and Ciarán Kelly, who's the Deputy Director at the Christian Institute, shared this conversation. And Paul wanted to know where the responsibility lay. After all, what does it say about us as a society that we have allowed drug addiction to get this bad?
Well, to what extent has society allowed it to happen? I mean, that's an interesting area of debate, isn't it? And certainly from one perspective, no one's going to say that this is a good thing. When you're faced with the individual ravages of drug addiction, nobody looks at that and thinks that's a good thing. But I suppose it comes back to this keeping it at arm's length perspective that you started off talking about. And I'm not just talking about Christian thinking now. I'm talking about public policy and society more generally. This idea, if it's not affecting me, then perhaps I don't need to concern myself with it. Or if people want to do that, it's a free society, and people should be available to do that. And that just really is to utterly, in my view, miss the point here. So from a Christian perspective, you would be thinking about things like, I already touched upon the fact that we need to love our neighbour and what that means. But also from a Christian perspective, you've got the whole idea of idolatry. You know, the first commandment is you shall have no other gods before me. And clearly what we see with drug addiction is where someone has an idol that takes over their lives, and as Christians we need to be strong in saying that that's wrong. More widely, it's an issue of looking at. I like to think of it as three legs of a stool, insofar as rehabilitation is one of the things we've talked about, and I'm sure Penny would agree that in an ideal world the Kenwood Trust wouldn't exist, because there would be no need to provide that service, but we live in a fallen world where this is going to go on. So you've got the rehabilitation leg, if you like. There's also the prevention and the policing legs of this stool, and I think somehow that in those areas there has been a bit of mixed messaging, so shall we say. So I don't think it's that society says just let them get on with it, but there's perhaps a weakness in saying, well, this is so bad that we need to take strong action to stop the spread of drugs, stop the importing of drugs, stop the distribution of drugs, stronger policing, as well as the rehabilitation model. And you can get mixed messages on that from various people of all political persuasions.
But that was the whole point of the war on drugs, wasn't it? That phrase that got trotted out and it made a good headline and so on. And I suspect many people think it's still going on and we're still battling and overcoming and so on. But it does kind of feel, you go to some communities, it feels as though there is next to no impact on the restriction of the availability of drugs, as though people seem to be able to get access to ever new types of drug. There's always some new substance that is blighting people's lives, it seems. And I wonder, Penny, whether that sort of headline perception that nothing is actually working and that the situation is getting worse is right. I mean, do you think that the war on drugs is something that's ever going to be successful?
That's a massive question, isn't it? And I know down here in Kent there has been a huge increase in arrests for county lines, and a huge push on trying to reduce that. And I think that is the way forward, is to clamp down on the drug dealers, etc. We do a lot of work in schools, so I think there is a society and moral issue with more education of young people to try and resist that as a way to relax and be with your mates. And lockdown doesn't help that either. Yes, there's a limited number of young people on the street, but the boredom is increased massively. And what we're seeing, I know it's a slightly different subject, but we're seeing a massive increase in people presenting to us with alcohol issues because lockdown has increased. Without doubt, alcohol is easy to get hold of and has become that drug of choice to overcome the challenges that we have at the moment. But overall, I think policing is tough, but I think there has been some progress made. Reducing that supply is absolutely key, but I'm a big believer also in that education piece with young people. Young people are far more concerned about the planet and everything else, and drugs fits quite well into that as a scenario. And then from a caring society, we need to be looking at the traumas and the mental health issues that adults are experiencing, which means that they turn to drugs to escape. So for me, it's all about prevention.
And what do you think, Ciarán, in terms of the success of this headline, this war on drugs thing? I mean, from your point of view, is the policy actually reaping rewards and benefits?
Well, as Penny said, it's a massive question, and I think when things get distilled down to a headline, it can cover over a multitude of sins, as it were. I think what I would say is that there's mixed evidence. I think there's been, in recent years, there has been this jump towards an alternative headline, which is the war on drugs isn't working, which I think just actually says rather more about people's willingness to give up than about the reality of the situation. So on the one hand, you have evidence that says, the National Crime Agency is intercepting live chats from criminals where they're saying that the officers are getting too smart, that this is becoming a difficult place to do business in the UK, and it's time to leave the UK. And you have operations where pill factories are closed down, and there's murder plots and arrested, and there's people trafficking things uncovered, because all of these things are meshed together. So that's where it is working. I think at the same time, though, you have to accept that it would appear that there's an increasing number of police forces who, for whatever reasons, they might say resourcing, I suppose, there's an increased tendency to turn more or less a blind eye, or one and a half eyes away from what's going on. And so diversion schemes are set up and community resolution orders, and there's over 50,000 of those dished out last year. So on the one hand, you see evidence that the war, quote unquote, is working. At the same time, there is also this evidence that in some places efforts are being undermined. I mean, personally, I don't think the war analogy or metaphor is that great. It tends to sort of conjure up probably ideas which aren't necessarily helpful when you're dealing with individual lives.
And that's so important to remember, isn't it? Individual lives, individual stories, very different circumstances which lead someone to end up with a drug addiction. Ciarán Kelly, Deputy Director at the Christian Institute, along with Penny Williams, who's the CEO of Kenwood Trust. They're Paul's guests all this week for Life Issues.